Hello and good day to y'all. There's a windy mafka out there, and try not to be distracted, although, we're talking about ADD here, so if you get distracted, totally understandable. Now, growing up was like the poster child for ADHD. I was definitely a crazy kid. And of course, my life, I was led to believe that I had this, deficiency or this deficit or this sort of disorder or something. And as I got, not free from it, but as I changed my perspective and was able to harness what was happening to me in a really good way, I started to see that ADD and ADHD were actually quite the superpower. So if you're someone here that struggles, or you're like, I think I might have it, or I have it, but I don't want to take medicine, or I've started, if you're someone who's kind of confused about what to do with this diagnosis, or trying to look for a new way of being or a different perspective, this video is going to open up the mind in so many ways. So let me just share a little bit about my story. When I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with ADD and I was put on Ritalin. Later, I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD. It's kind of a funny story. I was doing this test in middle school. I was in this little tiny cramped room, and there was this table with stuff all over it, and they were having me answer all these questions. And at the end of it, she's like, "Yep, you have ADD." And then I knocked over something, like a glass of water, spilled it all over the desk, and she's like, "ADHD." So I've been, in the ringer with this thing for a very long time, and from a young age, I was very hyper, had a lot of energy. I would go from room to room and kind of just tear up the house. And I was a loving kid. I wasn't an angry child necessarily, but there were definitely things. My mom and I had a lot of issues, and we can talk about it openly now because we've really worked through them in a big way. But growing up, she thought that I hated her. I was her first child, and she thought I just hated her, and she had her own self-esteem issues, and so I didn't have that loving mother figure. It was kind of this kind of pull. And I think that also played into her later realizing she had ADD and sort of projecting a lot of stuff onto me and thinking I didn't want to be around her, I didn't like her, I was just never wanted to sit in her lap, I was all over the place. And I definitely had trouble focusing in school. I didn't fit the standard, sit in class and be still. But of course, when you grow up in this paradigm, you're led to believe that that's the only option. That's the only way. You have to be this kid who sits there perfectly and answers questions and reads books. And I couldn't read. I learned the very basics, but reading and writing were just such a struggle to me. I couldn't really read a book. I would read through a page and just I would literally read a page and then be like, wait, what the hell did I just read? And go. I had to read the page 10 times to even begin to grasp what was happening. So reading was such a frustrating thing. I liked math and science, and I was pretty good at them. But yeah, so at 9 years old, I was put on Ritalin, and at the time, it wasn't like now where every other kid is on ADHD medication. At the time, it was me and maybe that one kid. I was the weirdo, but then there's always that one kid who's the extra weirdo that was on 4 medications. It was probably just the two of us. And I remember in 4th grade, the next year, the doctor, the school nurse, called my parents because they were concerned because I had lost weight. Here you are, a child who's growing, 9 to 10 years old, and I'm losing weight. And they're like, "Oh no, it's just a side effect of the medication." So at first I took it on and off, but then when I went to high school, I was really struggling in school and had a rough freshman year. There were some different things going on, but the first thing was well, let's put him back on the medication full time. So pretty much all of high school, morning I would take a 20 milligram of Adderall, and I had switched to Adderall at that point, and it would turn me into a robot. And I would go about my day, and I would focus, and I would study, and I did all my homework and studying in school. I never had to do anything out of school because I knew the medication would be gone by then. I took a 20 milligram pill in the morning, and come last period, it would start to wear off a little bit, and then I'd have sports and different things. I would drink one of those Boosts for breakfast, and then all day, my mom packed me a lunch of a little water bottle, an apple, and a sandwich. I would give the sandwich to a friend. I would take one bite of the apple, one sip of the water, and that was it. And I would basically fast all day. Food tasted like crap. I had no appetite. I had no passion. I didn't want to talk to my friends. I just wanted to get to class and do what I had to do and be done with it. Now, I played football and I wrestled, and I'm not to say I was good, but I was surrounded by a lot of, more jockey, kind of fun, energetic people, and most of the people thought I was just really lame, to be honest. And I had a few really good close friends, one of them being the quarterback, the all-star athlete, because he knew me out of school, and he was like, "Oh, Josh is so funny, you gotta hang out with him, just trust me, he's so funny." And my other friends would be like, "Really? Him? Like he's all right, I guess. Like he's good to cheat off of for school, but I don't know. But that's what Adderall did to me. It completely shut me down. So when I got into college, and first I was kind of taking it on and off, and I would go to class and I would struggle. So I was like, all right, let me just take some Adderall. And basically I stopped going to a lot of classes, and I would take Adderall and I would teach myself like the entire half semester in like a night. I would ace the test and then probably forget most of it and then go back to my life. I started a band in college with a good friend named Tim, and basically the shift for me was that he was writing a song, and the chorus was, "We'll shut you down like a bottle of drugs in the morning. We'll shut you down like a bottle." And he's like, "Hey, can I borrow your pill shaker? I think that'd be really cool as your pill bottle as a shaker in the song." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." Tim was a brilliant songwriter, so use it. And I'm listening to this song, "We'll shut you down like a bottle of drugs in the morning." And suddenly it clicks, and I'm like, wait, what is this song about? And he's like, well, if you really want to know, in part it's about you, and when you take your medicine, you turn into a totally different person. And something clicked, and I was like, wait, I've been told my whole life that I can't focus, and I've been taking Adderall to focus. But why is it that when I'm playing music, I'm fully present with music? I can spend 10 hours a day being with my guitar, playing, experiencing this music, being so enthralled by it, so excited by it, so much passion. And yet I'm told that I can't focus. It's like, well, wait, maybe it's just that the things I was supposed to focus on in school I wasn't interested in, and I actually can focus, and I don't need medicine. Something clicked in me. I literally flushed the pills down the toilet and have not taken them since. I was maybe 20 years old at the time. I'm pushing 40 now. And I just went cold turkey. And there were certain things that were a struggle. Certain things in school, certain things with studying. I found that in ways cannabis, even though it's very different than Adderall, it was able to help me focus kind of in different ways. So I would work with cannabis to some degree, in terms of focusing and trying different things. But for the most part, I just started shifting my perspective. And you might see me now, and I'm moving around a bit. But when I was a kid, I was literally I had a twitch, and I don't know if it started from Ritalin. I think it was definitely part of it. It gave me some kind of these weird mannerisms and twitches, but also I just had a lot of energy. I could not sit still. So when I started getting into meditation and Zen Buddhism and these different mindful practices, for me to sit still was a huge deal. And I would practice for hours and hours, just lying in bed. Could I just lie there and be totally still and totally present? And my body was so active that my muscles would, even if I could be totally still, my muscles would be spasming and jumping. But after many years of doing this practice, I was able to slow down. I was able to focus. Now, I went on such a huge journey to learn how to do things like reading and writing. The first book I ever really read was in college. And when I read it, it was the Da Vinci Code, and then the second book was the fourth Harry Potter book, Goblet of Fire. And I went from literally not being able to focus and read books and understand them to, I read probably 400 pages of Goblet of Fire. It was the second book I ever really read in one day. I was just so my mind was starting to open up to these new possibilities of oh, if I'm reading something that I like, if it's a good engaging story, I actually can be focused. And I'm sure, if you are exploring this ADHD world, that you've had a lot of people say different things. And I should have probably said at the beginning of the video, but of course I'm not a doctor. I'm not someone that's playing in that world at all. What I have to offer is kind of outside of that paradigm. And if you feel like medicine is right for you, and I know I have friends still that take medicine that, they take Adderall and things like that, and it works for them. Totally cool. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but rather express my experience of it. So I'm just going to flash forward through a lot of my story and talk about what shifted for me. So yeah, I didn't write or read for most of my life, and since then I've published, I think, over 10 books, and I can go into these focus holes where I'm so present. I'll write 120,000 words in 10 days and just be totally no writer's block, no nothing, because I learned that ADHD is not a deficit, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It's not a disorder, it's not a deficit, it's actually a superpower from the right perspective. And this is, to me, the most important part of the video. If you skip through everything else and you just see this part, this is all that matters. ADHD is not a disorder from the way I see it. So I heard someone say a few years back that from the perspective of, being in a classroom and having to focus on all these things, it was very challenging for someone that has whatever I have to be in that context. But if you go back to hunter-gatherer days, it's not that you're needing to be hyper-fixated on one thing, but you're having to be aware of so much. So I don't wear shoes anymore. Like 99% of the time I'm barefoot, and I live in the mountains in Colorado, and I like to hike, and oftentimes I'm hiking off trail barefoot, and there's cacti and there's snake and there's obstacles and rocks that are falling and different things like that. And you have to be really aware of everything going on. So if I'm like, in the classical tradition of being in school and reading a book and I'm present with one thing, that doesn't work. I need to track a freaking million things at one time. And so when I started to realize that, I'm like, oh, I'm listening to different sounds. I also can't listen to music when I'm hiking for the most part because I have to be so present with all the different sounds and what's going on. And I'm tracking all these different things, and if there are animals and if there are snakes and whatever's going on. And that takes a tremendous amount of focus, but it's a different kind of focus. I think this is the superpower piece, is the ADHD isn't a deficit in focus. It's a hyper awareness of focusing on so many things. So if you're a kid sitting in school and you're told you need to sit still and focus on one thing, but yet your mind is tracking so much, and maybe every person. I'm someone who, like, if I'm at a gathering, I'm very easily tracking all the different people's energies and what's going on and what are they doing and what's the overall energy and what needs to change. And there's so many things that I'm tracking. And yes, I've trained myself in ways to be more present with one person and be in conversation, but still my brain wants to go into all these spaces. And in the context of our society, maybe that doesn't make sense, but when I'm tuning into these more subtle frequencies and tuning into what actually is, I have no issue with being aware of so many things. So when I'm writing a book, my way of being present, my way of being focused might look different than somebody else's way. I do tend to go back. If I'm on my computer, I'll write, and then I might go like check my email or like pop on YouTube or Instagram for a minute and then come right back. I don't mind having these sort of like micro quote unquote distractions, because that's part of my training and saying, okay, give yourself a few seconds or a minute to like distract into something else and then come right back. And that keeps me in the flow. I'm not saying, oh, I need to be only on my word processing document and writing this book, and if I have any distraction, that's a problem. I don't have those stories because I know what works for me. And it's the same thing with fermentation. And we do a lot of homesteading. We grow a lot of our own food, and we raise animals. And I recently wrote a book about fermentation and preservation, and it kind of occurred to me that I have so many things that I'm tracking. And when I wake up, I'm like, okay, I'm looking at the different krauts and the cured meats, and I'm looking at the meads that are bubbling away, and I'm checking the chickens and the rabbits, and I'm tracking and the sourdough starter and all this stuff all throughout the day. And I have to be able to kind of go from thing to thing to thing and give each thing a moment of my time and presence. Okay, what's going on? How you doing? We doing good here? Cool, great, good to see you. And then on to the next thing. And so it's the same concept with like what somebody would say is a deficit, or a disorder. I'm actually shifting that and using it as a superpower to be able to do a lot. So I'm not saying that if you're someone that doesn't have quote unquote ADD or ADHD, that you should try to train your mind in this way, but rather if you're somebody that maybe resonates with some of what I'm saying, and you have this struggle with focusing and not being able to sit in class and or whatever you have to do, when you start to shift the perspective and start to turn it around and see the good in it, you can design your life in a way that actually makes sense. So my issue with the label, and I get a lot of flack from this, people are like, you can't tell people not to take medicine, which is why I'm not. I just don't. And for me, it didn't work. And for me, it was so obvious that didn't work. But I also get a lot of flack when I've talked about this in the past about the diagnoses. People are like, you have ADHD and that's just the way it is and that's how it's going to be. And I'm like, cool, that's your belief. And if that's what you believe, great. And yet it's in the society we've constructed, we've made up all these different diagnoses and spectrums and different things, and they might serve us in that paradigm, but I've stepped away from the paradigm, living my life in a way that makes sense to me. I'm not trying to fit into some box, into some mold. So yes, maybe somebody could drop me into a class right now and they might diagnose me as this or that, but it has nothing to do with my life and the way that I live my life. Now that being said, I also think that the way that I'm able to write and the focus and the passion that I have, like when I go into a writing portal, I'm so present with it. My brain like hyper focuses and like almost obsesses about these things. It's the same thing when I'm really into like making music and doing an album, or whatever it might be, that like my creative project or building something, I get so hyper focused and so excited about it. It doesn't mean I just forget about all my, duties and responsibilities as a partner and as a soon-to-be dad and different things like that, but that I've found a way to channel this passion to actually create. I hear a lot with people that are ADHD, there's like a laziness, or there's a struggle to do anything and to be productive or whatever without their medicine. And in a certain context and paradigm, that makes sense. But when you start to shift the paradigm and you start to see it for what it is, this incredible superpower, you start to realize you can do anything. And that ADHD not being a crippling label is actually this like, oh, like let's take away the ADHD thing and just say whatever it is that I have and other people I know in a similar space have, it's just this amazing being. Like we all have our own potential. We all have our own ways of doing things and thinking about things. And when you see it like that, it's like, oh, okay, let me just learn to work with this and work with what's going on and harness it and actually create and be inspired and be excited. So I could go on and on and on about ADHD, but I just wanted to share a bit about my experience. For anybody out there that's struggling, like I want you to know that the silly diagnoses actually serve some kind of benefit, because maybe you'll realize that you are special. You've got something really good to share, and if you want to tune into it and drop the label of it all, but just kind of say, who am I and what's true for me in this moment and what's coming through and how can I work with that, and not beat myself up and have all these stories, but break down the stories and destroy the stories and get present with what is. Well, then you can create, and then you can do amazing things that you've always wanted to do. So that's all I have to say about that. Peace.